Hello everyone, welcome back to Introduction to Prose. In the last class, we have seen Le Morte d'Arthur by Thomas Mallory and Elizabethan prose. Today, let us move on to 18th century prose. 18th century prose. 18th century was famous for its prose writings. Please do remember that 18th century in English literature is also called Augustan literature or Neoclassical age. Historians call this age Augustan age or Neoclassical age. The famous poet and critic Matthew Arnold called this period Age of Prose and Reason. Reason here means intelligence. Why this period is called the Age of Prose? This period gave more importance to prose rather than poetry. Even poetry written during this period had prose-like quality. It looked like prose. It was prosaic. Another important feature of this period, the writers of this era thought that literature can be used to teach something to the public. That is, didactic. Literature of this era was didactic, meant for teaching something to the public. Teaching means teaching morals, for example, teaching behavior, habits, etc., good qualities. Existing poetry was written in a high, decorative language, not in a common man's language. Poetry was written for elite people, for kings, queens, aristocrats, not for common public. Prose was comparatively simpler. Instead, prose was written for common people. The only one great poet of this period was Alexander Pope. However, the great prose writers were Joseph Addison, Richard Steele, Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels, Daniel Defoe, who wrote Robinson Crusoe, and Samuel Johnson, the great critic. Now let us examine each of these writers one by one. Jonathan Swift is a very famous name, born in 1667 to 1745. Swift was an Irish writer, that is, a writer from Ireland. He was mainly a satirist. Satirist means a person who make fun of the political social conditions of that period and express it through literature. Most important prose works are Tale of a Tub, 1704, An Argument Against Abolishing Christianity, 1712, Gulliver's Travels, 1726, A Modest Proposal, 1729. As you may know, the most famous among these works is Gulliver's Travels. You might have heard of the stories of Gulliver going to the land of Lilliput, where he finds small people, and in Brobdingnag, where he sees big people. You can see the cover of Gulliver's Travels. See, you should read Gulliver's Travels before completing the course, because it is one of the landmarks of English literature. There is no point in completing the course and saying without reading classics like this. See, now coming to Addison and Steele. Addison and Steele were notable writers of the period. They wrote in simple style without any decorations. Dr. Johnson called the style of Addison as middle style, not too high, not too low, but middle. In 1709, Steele started a magazine called Tatler. Addison wrote regularly in that magazine. Both of them became friends, and together they started a magazine called Spectator, 1711. Spectator has become a very famous magazine at that time. Their essays were of a particular style. What was their style? They created a character called Sir Roger de Coverley. This character appeared in all their essays. These essays were called coverly papers because they featured the character called Coverly. You can see the title page of Spectator, third volume, which is stored in museums now. The most important periodicals of the time were Daniel Defoe's Review, 1704, Steele Statler, Spectator, Plebeian. Plebeian means common man. Samuel Johnson started writing in a magazine called Gentleman's Magazine. Gentleman's Magazine. Johnson was a lexicographer, means a person who compiles a dictionary. He also wrote periodical essays in a magazine called The Rambler. One of the best writings by Johnson was his prefaces written to Shakespearean plays. He wrote a collection of short biographies of 52 poets of the time, along with the critical appreciation. The book was called The Lives of Poets, 1771 to 81. He wrote this in between this period, and it was compiled into a book called Lives of Poets. Though you may not be familiar with the name Daniel Defoe, you will be familiar with the book Robinson Crusoe. Story of the shipwrecked man who lived in a lonely island for 28 years. It has become a children's classic. And some of the important writers of the period and their works are given here. Some other important writers of the period were Oliver Goldsmith, 1728 to 1774, and a Citizen of the World, an inquiry into the present state of polite learning in Europe, the history of England, history of Earth and animated nature, etc. Along with these works, he wrote a very famous novel called The Vicar of Wakefield. മലയാളത്തിലൊക്കെ ട്രാൻസ്ലേറ്റ് ചെയ്യപ്പെട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട് വേക്ക്ഫീൽഡിലെ വികാരി എന്ന പേരിൽ. Another writer of the period was Edward Gibbon. History of Switzerland, one work which was not completed. The next one is a very famous work, The Decline and Fall of Roman Empire, 1776. That should be remembered. Then Edmund Burke is also another very famous writer. He wrote two types of books. He wrote philosophical writings and political pamphlets. Philosophical writings are coming under the Vindication of Natural Society, a philosophical inquiry into the origin of ideas of sublime and beautiful. And political writings are Thoughts on the Course of the Present Discontents, Reflections on the Revolution in France, a letter to the noble lord, letters on see you should I don't say that you should remember all these works, but at least remember the famous works, at least one or two should be remembered, because writing the names of these works will be adding credibility to your writing. So remember at least two of the books written by these writers, and the famous book should be remembered, strictly remembered. For example, when you say about Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels should be referred. When you are talking about Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe should be referred. Then we are stopping here for a while. We will continue with Victorian prose in the next class. Thank you.